Take a moment to imagine a colorful playground, alive with the sound of children's laughter during playtime, full of curiosity and wonder as they interact with God's creation. This is a sight that I am greeted with every time I walk past the Trinity playground during Imago Day playtime. It is inspiring to see such joy and excitement displayed by these children as they interact with the world around them. God's glorious plan for each of these children seems to unravel before my eyes as I experience these children being loved, cared for, and given an opportunity to learn and to grow. Every child deserves this opportunity to truly experience life and love, regardless of any disability they may be afflicted with. A search and destroy epidemic is currently taking place in our society. Unlike modern birth control, a defined means of quantity control, prenatal testing is now being administered as a form of quality control. Prenatal testing has become a common practice worldwide and is administered to detect the health status of the unborn baby. When a prenatally detected condition is deemed as complicated and/or incurable, the pregnancy is often terminated. When the perspective is perpetuated that this unborn child will have nothing of value to offer to life, coupled with the notion that it would be less burdensome for all if this life were to be terminated, our society begins a journey down a very slippery, dangerous path towards eugenics. This dangerous trend must be stopped before it is able to further implant its roots into our society. Before 1986, prenatal testing was primarily dealt to the patient based on the age of the expectant mother. Amniocentesis, the tapping of the amniotic fluid by means of a long needle to detect specific traits, was solely offered to women above the age of 35, as the incidence for birthing a child with genetic anomalies increases as the woman gets older. However, from 1986 to 1990, these tests were offered to a wider spectrum of patients, and over twice as many babies were found to carry the gene for Down syndrome as well as other genetic diseases. Similarly, over twice as many children were aborted in these 4 years alone. After 1991, new, less invasive, more convenient, more expedient tests were introduced into the medical community. However, no matter how convenient or inexpensive these tests were found to be, they were still found to have harmful effects on the fragile bodies of the developing baby. With a 5 to 10% miscarriage rate, as well as a 1 to 5% false positive rate, these tests also included missing or stubby fingers and toes, small tongues, underdeveloped jaws, and in some instances, missing limbs. When a child has been diagnosed prenatally as having an incurable genetic disease, it has been seen now in our society that the overwhelming end result is termination of the pregnancy. On July 14, 1933, the law for the prevention of genetically disabled offspring was enacted in Germany. These men and women were brought before federal court and forced to be sterilized on the basis of establishing a community free of mental compromise. Physicians who failed to report such afflicted patients were fined. The goal being to establish an almost perfect society. Today, a similar epidemic may be on the horizon. Doctors are now being motivated by financial incentive to sway pregnant mothers to favor a termination if such unfavorable diagnoses are given. 400,000 Germans were forcibly sterilized by 1945. And this act was regarded as a major stepping stone towards the Holocaust. Our nation cannot be allowed to fall prey to these same evils. Geneticist James D. Watson writes, "In order to ensure that history does not repeat itself, is for the scientific and medical communities to remain constantly vigilant for abuses of genetics." Unfortunately, the medical community has become calloused towards such abuse. These tests are causing abortion to become increasingly more acceptable, to the point of being presented as the beneficial and preferred option by doctors who now intentionally emphasize the sacrifices that will be needed to be made to cope with the more challenging aspects of certain genetic diseases in order to sway pregnant mothers to favor a termination. These tests should be unobtainable until after the child is born, giving every child the chance to live, something every soul deserves to have. Encouraging the mindset that a baby with such incurable genetic disorders is an undesired outcome leads our society down the path of eugenics, and this notion destroys human dignity and the value of a soul in our culture, thus diminishing the sanctity of life. By determining to terminate the life of a baby that is classed as a burden to society, or just because they do not meet some idealized standard of perfection, our culture is no different than those who discriminate on the basis of race, religion, and cultural diversity. When most people hear of reducing illness, they think of greater access to healthcare or developing new treatments for disease. However, public health experts now boast of reducing illness by means of prenatal diagnosis and abortion. These screenings have seemingly turned into a search and destroy mission rather than a helpful and informative way of preparing families for the extra attention this little life may need. Statistics from the New England Journal of Medicine show that the minority of women use these tests as a means for preparing for their pregnancy, and 90 to 95% of women choose to abort their unborn baby once such a diagnostic is given. Reported rationale shows that these mothers are fearful of carrying a genetically disabled baby. They are fearful for the welfare of their child, such as potential bullying that may occur, and they are fearful for the alterations that will be needed to be made to their lifestyle once this child is brought into their life. It has been shown that women who were previously committed to carrying out their pregnancy full term reportedly changed their minds after receiving a positive diagnosis and having their decisions swayed by the physicians. A caveat must be made, for certain prenatal tests can be helpful. Specific tests that determine cardiovascular, respiratory, and digestive defects can be altered in utero, as well as prepared for the immediate surgery following birth that has shown to be invaluable for the preservation of life for both child and mother. Certain physical or life-threatening defects can be altered or modified in utero that have shown to be impossible without such foreknowledgeness and preparedness of the medical team. Therefore, rather than completely eliminating such tests, the standard for these tests must be redefined. Above all, the purpose of prenatal testing should be to detect certain illnesses for which there is a cure. Currently, there is no cure for Down syndrome as well as Fragile X syndromes. Termination should never be considered a cure. The money that is being used to further develop such tests as well as offer them to expectant mothers could instead be used to further provide genetic counseling to expectant parents as well as work towards a cure. If there is one piece of morality that we can all agree upon, it is that discrimination against those with disabilities is evil. The idea of selective abortion, the elimination of fetuses based solely on certain traits deemed undesirable, has moved from merely threatening our culture to being observed as a major part of our culture. The disability is truly not the pressing issue that needs to be solved. Instead, today's scientific and medical communities should be working to adapt to today and tomorrow's disabled citizens. This debate causes a war within the hearts of those who must come to the realization that their pregnancy is not what they anticipated, causing for a more intimate examination of their moral values. As a result, even those who would originally disagree with abortion now find disabilities a justified means to abort. The medical community is striving to convince us to conform, to convince us that the best path, the righteous path, is the path that is less expensive, the path that is faster, the path that is more convenient, the path that is simpler. However, the Lord commands his sons and daughters not to conform, for we know the path that has been set before us, and we know the standard of righteousness that has been set by God. We must not conform to the standards of the world or allow those around us to do the same, but instead follow along the path that we know is just. Traditionally, a human life has been defined as a member of the human biological species possessing the human genetic code. However, this definition is being redefined and narrowed down to a much more selective standard. Instead, what is now deemed as a viable human being in the medical community is one who possesses specific human characteristics along with the human genetic code. Characteristics often considered are the ability to reason, the ability to think, the ability to imagine, and the ability to communicate. These lists of characteristics that have been extended may be altered to fit the definition of the speaker. This flexible definition is causing physicians and parents alike to feel justified in their decision to selectively terminate. This is a corrupt thought that defies the Creator's standard for a human being. For Psalms 139:13 and 16 says, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. The Lord knew us before any physician and before even our mothers. The Lord knew that we had a plan and a purpose, and no child has been created as a mistake and should not be viewed as such." The definition of what is a viable human being should not be allowed to be subjective but objective. It is being argued that it is a noble duty for parents to avoid bringing diseased children into the world. Prenatal diagnosis is said to increase the well-being of children, for children born with maladies and defects are believed to suffer from a decrease in so-called overall well-being. However, this duty directly contradicts the biblical duty of what a parent should be seeking for their children, which is to seek God's will above all else, not to seek perfection. Psalms 127:3-5 says, "Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them." Children are bestowed as a blessing and a heritage and should be treated as such, no matter what. When testing is debated, it is not uncommon to include such benefits that come with a positive or negative diagnosis, such as emotional relief if given a negative diagnosis, removing social stigma, alleviating the financial burden of caring for a compromised child, etc. However, few take these benefits into consideration, and the majority makes the immediate decision to terminate following these tests. Is it really worth it? Are these so-called benefits of the test worth the numbers of babies who are not given a chance to see life? Increased levels of stress and anxiety are also found to come with a positive diagnosis, as women worry and they stress and they are anxious throughout the pregnancy when they don't know what is ahead, and they can't plan exactly for all of the alterations that will be needed to be made to their life. These increased levels of stress and anxiety have proved to be detrimental to the fragile developing bodies of the unborn baby. The argument that the genetic test could equip rather than relieve the family could be seen with merit. However, it is hard to say that these tests can truly properly equip a woman for what it will truly be like to experience living with a disabled child until she is able to truly have that experience for herself. For we must stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves, and we must speak for those who have no voice. We must recognize that some knowledge is truly not meant for us to acquire, and we too often let our own selfish desires to know more get in the way of following the path that God has set before us. He will reveal all that we need to know in due time. Each child has been knit together in the womb specifically for the family that the Lord has entrusted the child with. Every child deserves this inalienable right to life, regardless of any disability or defect. No child, regardless of any of these ailments, is a mistake, for every child is made in the image of God. It is truly difficult to define humanity, for it cannot be defined by the chromosomal makeup of a human being, as an individual is so much more complex and beautifully made than our minds can comprehend. We are not the creators of this world, but rather in stark contrast. It is by the grace of God that we breathe its air and live off of its earth. That being said, it is clear from these arguments that it is entirely unnecessary to evaluate the genetic makeup of the newly created before they are brought into the world. I will leave you with this. Isaiah 55, 8 through 9 says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. It will not render me empty, but will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I sent it." Thank you.